Hey guys, so one of my absolute favorite things to do as both a designer and a developer is to design and build query loops. I don't know what it is, but I just get a ton of satisfaction around building them out and designing them and just seeing the dynamic content populate. So today, to show my excitement for building out query loops, I'm introducing a new mini series called Query Loop-a-Palooza. I'm going to do a few videos covering a few different query loop builds for a few different scenarios. So first up, in today's video, we're going to go over a blog post query loop. This is a design that I spotted over on Kinsta's blog that I really loved the subtle layout and design, as well as a little bit of extra effects that they have on hover. So let me go ahead and show you what that looks like and we can get started building. All right, so here's Kinsta's blog that I'm drawing inspiration from and going to essentially be recreating in a query loop using GenerateBlocks. So as you can see, it's really just a grid of blog posts, but as you hover over it, the card kind of grows and shows a drop shadow, so it lifts off the page, which I think is a cool effect. I've already gone through and added the content to my website here, so I've got 6 blog posts we're going to utilize so that we can see 2 rows in this grid built out. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I've got a new page set up here titled News. This is where we're going to feature this new query loop blog post layout. So first, we're going to insert a container, and I'm going to use one of my global styles to add some padding to that, and then we'll add the inner container here. Now first, on the background of our outer container, I'm going to add a slight background color. Now I did build this out in Figma just so that I can have my own copy version of it for design. And the background color I've chosen is F1F1. So let's go ahead and come to backgrounds and put in F1F1F1. All right, so on the inner container, we're going to go ahead and insert our query loop. I am going to go ahead and just say start blank because none of these really achieve what I'm going for in my query loop design. And so we're just going to start from scratch. So we'll open up our sidebar here so we can see our block layout. And you'll see we've got our query loop block with the looper and loop item. Now on the outer query loop block, we are going to actually just utilize the same default settings since we're just pulling in regular posts from our WordPress site. Now I am just going to say 6 posts per page because that's all we're going to feature in this loop. Then in the looper, I'm going to go ahead and choose that 3-column grid layout that we're going for. And inside our loop item, you'll see now it's a 3rd width here as a container. And we can start building out that query loop. Now, the awesome part, and maybe this is part of my love with building query loops, is you really only build out the one card and it populates the rest of those cards in that query loop for you dynamically. That's essentially what a query loop does. And so we really only need to focus on this singular card. So as we kind of break down our card and its elements, we see at the top we've got an image. And this image spans full width of the card, right? Edge to edge, and it's got some rounded corners, top right and top left. And then we've sort of got a container here on the bottom that holds our title, an excerpt, and then our date and category. And then again, on the bottom left and bottom right, we've got some rounded corners. And then around the entire card, we've got a slight border. So how I really want to tackle this is because our image is full width, I'm going to put in the image first and be able to utilize that full width of our card in itself. And then I'm going to insert another container below that that will house the rest of our content within that for our copy. So first up, what we're going to do is insert that image. And I'm going to say image. And you'll see now it starts duplicating 6 times because again, this is a query loop. It's going to duplicate out and all the posts that you have dictated by the number of posts we set in our original query loop setting. And for this image, I just want it to show the featured image. So I'm going to click that dynamic data tag, click featured image, and insert the tag. So now you see all 6 of my posts have populated with that featured image. Now, before we move on any further, I want to go ahead and go back up to our looper block and set some column and row gaps here just so that we're seeing the layout in real time, how it should be without them touching in the middle. So column gap, I'm going to say 1 rem, as well as row gap 1 rem. And then what we can actually do is come to our loop item container here in this block, and we could set up a couple things like our rounded corners as well as the background color for that container. So since you see we've got a light gray background, the container holding the card here is actually a white background on top. So we'll come to backgrounds and choose white. And then I actually have some global style set up for, not padding, I've got border. And I'm going to say a large border, may even be extra large because I know on Kinsta site they've got a pretty good size border radius. I think that should actually do fine for what we're going for. And you'll notice though, since I put the rounded corners on this loop item, that our image in the top left and top right is still square, and it's not inheriting that border radius that I put in on the loop item. And so there's one quick easy way to fix that, and that's to clip the content in the overflow. So if we come to position and we come to overflow X and overflow Y, we're going to say clip on both of those. And now you can see right away the images now are inheriting that border radius from the outer loop item. Perfect. So next we can go ahead and jump down below our image and add a new container that's going to house the rest of our content. And our padding on this, again, I have some global styles set up. I'm going to go with padding medium, and the spacing on this is 1.5 rem all the way around. I think that should suit us fine for what we're going for in this layout. So next we'll add a headline block, and we'll actually change this to an H3 because normally I'll have an H2 on the page preceding the query loop. So I'm going to go with H3 on this, and we're going to set up a dynamic tag for that to be the post title for the current post. So we're going to insert the H3 there, and you can see it's definitely way too big for what we're looking for. So I'm going to come to typography and font size. I'm going to say about 24 pixels maybe. Let's see, what's Kinsta kind of looking at? Yeah, maybe even a little hair smaller. I'm working with a different font. This font in particular is called Fig Tree. I wasn't too worried about choosing the same font family as Kinsta. So, and then we're going to go with a dark color here, and I think that looks fine. So then below that, as we continue on our layout, we've now got an excerpt. So we can insert a text block here from GenerateBlocks, and under dynamic tags we're going to choose post excerpt, and we're going to go ahead and just leave the excerpt length at 55 because I think based on the length of our excerpts here we're utilizing they're not too long, so 55 words should be plenty, and if not we can adjust that. And then we're going to uncheck the theme read more text. We do not want to utilize that. And we should be good. Oh, I don't know how that got changed. Should be 55. All right, so now we got our excerpts in, and I do want to style this a little bit. I would say maybe about 14, 15 pixels font size, and then line height 1.4. EM should be good, maybe even 1.5. And text color, I'm going to go with that same dark gray. And it's coming along. So we've got our featured image, we've got our headline title, our excerpt, and now all that's left is our date and category. And then we've got a few additional tweaks after that. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to insert a new text block and open our dynamic tags. And if you remember, the first thing up is our published date. So we're going to say post date, current post, and just leave that as is. Now I am going to also style this down. I've actually got a class here for body small, maybe even extra small. Yeah, I like that a lot better. And what we need to do now, though, is add the post category next to the date. So what we can actually do is insert another dynamic tag inline on this same text block. So in order to figure out what that tag is, I'm going to go in and edit this post date and say term list for current post. On the taxonomy, we're going to choose categories. Separator, I'm going to do space, bullet, space. So that's an option 8 symbol. And you'll see this is the dynamic tag it created for us. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy that tag and exit out without saving because I don't want it to override my post date dynamic tag already. So I'm going to hit edit on this, and now inline add space option 8 and paste in that other dynamic tag. So now when we say preview, we've got our two dynamic tags set up on the same line. Now you can do this an alternative way by creating two separate text blocks and wrap them in a container using Flex to put them side by side. But I find that the inline feature and editing it is pretty easy once you just create that dynamic tag and copy and paste it into the same text block. All right, so we've got the date and category set up, and what we need to do next that you'll notice is the date actually needs to stick to the bottom of the card. And in fact, we need to zero out the bottom padding on that or the margin, because I don't want anything extra besides what we've dictated in our outer padding in the container itself. But you'll see on the other cards here in my query loop that the date sort of fluctuates as the copy fluctuates, and I always want that date and categories to stick to the bottom. Now, because we have three elements here, the title, the excerpt, and the meta, we actually need to wrap these in order to achieve what we're going for. So if we take the headline and the excerpt and wrap those in a new container, we're going to set those to flex column and set flex grow to 1. On our outer container, we're going to choose that to flex. We'll say column and insert 1 on grow again. So now it's still not working quite exactly how we want. That's because we need to come out to our outer loop item and set this to display flex and make sure we're on column. So now you can see the date is sticking to the bottom of our card. However, on these that the content is real shorter and it's hugging up against that date a little bit too tight. So we need to come to our container that's holding both the container for our headline and excerpt and our meta and add some gap there. So we're going to do some row gap. I'm going to say 1.5 rem. And that should allow enough spacing in those scenarios where it's a little bit tighter and needs to be spaced out. All right, now I just realized on these images that this one is actually coming down below the rest of them. And so we didn't set actually any constraints on our image. So if I go into that image block and on the height, I'm going to set this at 195 pixels. And then under media, I want to make sure that object fit is set to cover. So now everything's going to be lined up perfectly for us across the board. All right, so we've got a couple last things to tackle here to get it exactly the way, or as close to Kinsta's layout here. And that is adding a border around our entire card here. See the small 1 pixel border. And then the hover effect when it rises up and adds that drop shadow. So if we come to our loop item, I'm going to go to border and add a 1 pixel border. I'm going to choose, I've got a gray color here. I don't know if it's dark enough. Not quite. Let's just make it a little bit darker for the sake of this tutorial. All right, and that's looking pretty good. So now we've got our 1 pixel border on our cards. Let's go ahead and publish this page and jump on the front end to see what this looks like. All right, it's looking really solid. So really, we just need to add the hover effects on the entire card and make sure that it's also clickable. So if we jump back in, and we want the hover effect to take place on the whole entire card here. So I'm going to choose that loop item, and I'm going to go to the effects panel. And then on the selector of our loop item, I'm going to make sure that I choose hover. And on hover, I wanted to do a couple things. I wanted to show a box shadow, and I wanted to rise up a little bit and essentially transform up about 10 pixels or so. So we're going to add transform, translate, and it's going to be -8 pixels or so. So now you can see -8 pixels on hover is going to push that card up. We're going to save that. And then our box shadow, I'm going to leave it as 0x offset, Y offset to about 8 pixels, blur to about 20 maybe. We can play with this, and spread at about 3 pixels. So if we hover over it, you can see now we've got that box shadow showing up on hover. We could probably lower the blur down to about 12 maybe. I think that looks a little bit closer to Kinsta's. It's a little bit darker on the bottom on the y-axis. But I think that's pretty good. Maybe we could up the opacity on our box shadow here to about 0.15. Let's go ahead and save that, and we can just kind of see how it looks on the front end. And yeah, I'm going to go with that. I think it looks pretty good. So on hover, we've got our cards translating up 8 pixels and showing that box shadow. So now we need to make sure that this transition takes place smoothly. And so we're going to go back to our main card here of our loop item. And we're going to add a transition. I think probably about 0.3 seconds. And we'll say ease in out and go ahead and save that. So now as we go and hover over our cards, those transitions are taking place in a much smoother transition instead of being more abrupt. All right, so now the very last piece to this is making sure that the card is clickable to the post title URL. And so what we need to do is come to our post title, and we're going to go back into our dynamic tag, and make sure that it's linked to the post and insert that dynamic tag. So now you can see it changed the color of my text and added some underlines. So I want to go in and make sure under typography for the links, we change the text color back to dark. And I actually don't want any text decoration. So now it looks the same as before, how we'd like it. And right now, because we only added the link to the title and we actually want our entire card clickable, I've got to add my stretch link class to the entire loop item in order to make it clickable for the whole thing. And so if we just choose that loop item and we come down and we go to our stretch class or stretch link and add that to the entire card, we can go ahead and save that and refresh on the front end. And now you can see anywhere on my card, I can click and go to that post, which is exactly the effect we wanted. Now the code for that stretch link global class is in a previous video I've mentioned, so feel free to check it out. All right, so if we jump back into our front end and go to the customizer, I just want to take a look, lastly, responsively how this looks. Now, on tablet, I really don't care for the way this looks. I'd rather it be a 2-column grid. And so if I jump back into my looper and go to tablet, we can go to grid layout and choose the 2-column layout here that they give you as an option. So if we go ahead and refresh now and jump down into tablet, we now have the 2-column layout. Looks much better. Definitely stays closer to the original proportions on desktop. Now we jump to mobile and it's keeping to the 2 columns, so we want to jump that down to just 1. So then if we go to mobile in our looper and we choose just 1 FR, we can save that. Go ahead and refresh once more. We'll see tablet, 2-column, and mobile, 1 single column. All right, I hope you enjoyed part 1 of Query Loop-a-Palooza this week, and I showed you how to create the query loop using blog posts based off the style from Kinsta's website. Now, next time on part 2 of Query Loop-a-Palooza, I'm going to actually build out a query for a portfolio, and that will be using custom fields from a custom post type. So, to show you a little bit different angle and totally new design. Looking forward to it, and be sure to tune in for part 2 and subscribe below to be notified when that video goes live. Thanks a lot. We'll see you guys soon.